Welcome to the podcast. I'm Lekan Steven. I want to start today with a thought that honestly took me a while to sit with when I first encountered it. Bitcoin was built to survive a lot of things: governments, banks, inflation, censorship, even outright attempts to shut it down. But it was never really built to survive a machine that could look at a public address and just figure out the private key behind it, reverse engineer it from thin air. And that's the conversation we're having today, because that kind of machine is no longer science fiction. It's a research program with a budget, a roadmap, and a timeline that keeps getting shorter every year. I've been buried in source material for weeks getting ready for this episode. Research papers from Google's quantum AI division, from Caltech, from a startup called Quera that's working on a completely new kind of quantum hardware. SEC filings, yes, actual SEC filings from BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF, where the language about quantum risk is starting to get genuinely interesting. Long roadmaps from the Ethereum Foundation, detailed analyses from groups like Chain Code Labs and ARK Invest. And what I want to do today is try to separate the sci-fi panic from the actual math, because both exist and they often get mixed together in ways that make it really hard to think clearly about what's actually happening. So let's start with the most basic and the most misunderstood question. What does a quantum computer actually do to a blockchain? Because when most people hear the phrase quantum attack on Bitcoin, I think they imagine some kind of magic wand. A machine flips on, the whole system collapses, every wallet drains at once, the end. That's not what this is. It's not brute force. It's not melting down the vault. It's something much more specific and honestly much more interesting. Quantum computers are not a threat to Bitcoin's monetary policy. They can't conjure new coins past the 21 million cap. They're not a threat to the cryptography that secures the structure of the blockchain itself, the part that links one block to the next, that makes the ledger tamper-proof. That stuff is built on a different kind of math that quantum computers don't really break in any practical way we know of. So the mining process is safe. The chain itself is safe. The structure is fine. What's not fine is the signature. The signature is the part of crypto that proves you, specifically you, are the one authorizing a transaction. Think of it as the mathematical lock on your wallet. Every time you send Bitcoin, you produce a tiny mathematical proof that says, I'm the owner, this transaction is legit. Anyone in the world can verify that proof, but no one is supposed to be able to run the math backward to figure out your private key from it. That backward direction, going from a public address back to the secret key behind it, is supposed to take longer than the age of the universe on any normal computer. It's a one-way street. You can drive forward all day. You can't drive in reverse. A quantum computer changes that. There's a specific technique called Shor's algorithm, and what it does in plain English is collapse that one-way street into a two-way street. It doesn't guess. It doesn't brute force. It exploits a deep pattern in the math that classical computers simply can't see. And if a quantum computer can run Shor's algorithm at sufficient scale, it can take a public key, do some math on it, and spit out the private key behind it. Once it has your private key, it can sign transactions as you. It can move your funds. It can do anything you could do, because as far as the network is concerned, it is you. Okay, so the question becomes, how exposed are public keys really? Because the standard defense against this kind of attack, the answer cryptographers have been giving for years, is don't worry, your public key isn't actually public. It's hidden behind another layer of cryptography until you spend. And that's partially true. In a standard Bitcoin wallet, when you give someone your address, you're not giving them your public key directly. You're giving them a scrambled fingerprint of it. The actual public key stays tucked away until the moment you spend funds from that wallet for the first time. So in theory, there's a shield. But once you really dig into how Bitcoin is used in the real world, you realize that shield is already down for a huge portion of the supply. There are three big categories of exposure I want you to know about. The first category is the oldest coins on the network. We're talking Satoshi era stuff, 2009, 2010, the very early Bitcoin transactions. Back then, addresses didn't use the hashing system that hides your public key. The public key was just sitting there, fully visible on the ledger, right next to the funds. Those wallets are naked. They've always been naked. And nobody can easily do anything about it, because in many cases, the owners are long gone or have lost access to the keys. The second category is reused addresses, and this one is enormous. Anytime a wallet sends a transaction, even a tiny one, the public key for that wallet gets revealed on the blockchain forever. The shield drops. And it doesn't come back up. So if you receive funds at an address, then later spend even a small fraction of those funds, that whole address is now exposed for as long as it holds any value at all. This pattern is incredibly common at exchanges, at custodians, in and institutional cold storage. Basically, anywhere you have a wallet that's been used more than once, an enormous amount of money is sitting in addresses where the shield is permanently down and nobody's rushing to fix it. The third category surprised me when I read about it because it's actually the newest part of Bitcoin. It's called Taproot. Taproot is a big, modern Bitcoin upgrade that was supposed to bring better privacy and smarter contract features. But to make Taproot work, the design exposes a version of the public key directly on the chain. Now, it's a slightly modified version, but from a quantum resistance standpoint, it's a step backward. The newest, fanciest, most celebrated part of Bitcoin is, in this one very specific way, more vulnerable than what came before it. That's the kind of trade-off that doesn't usually show up in the headlines. So you've got all these exposed keys floating around, and researchers talk about two ways an attacker could go after them. The first is what they call an at-rest attack. This is the slow version. The attacker just picks a dormant wallet, say an old Satoshi-era address, and quietly grinds away at the math for as long as it takes. Days, weeks, months. The funds aren't moving, there's no time pressure. They eventually crack the key, sign a transaction, and walk away with the coins. That's already bad. But the at-rest scenario isn't the scary one. The scary one is what's called an on-spend attack. And once you understand how it works, it sounds genuinely like a movie heist. Here's the setup. Even if you've been careful, even if your address has never been used and your public key has never been exposed, the second you decide to send your Bitcoin somewhere, to a friend, to an exchange, to buy a cup of coffee, your public key has to be revealed to the network. There's no way around it. The network has to see it to verify the transaction. And before that transaction gets confirmed on the blockchain, it sits in a kind of public waiting room. Anyone in the world can look into that waiting room and see your transaction sitting there. On Bitcoin, the average time between when a transaction is announced and when it's confirmed in a block is about 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Now here's the trick. Shore's algorithm doesn't have to start from scratch every time. An attacker can pre-compute a huge chunk of the math months in advance. All the fixed parameters of the cryptography that don't change from one user to another. So by the time your transaction shows up in the waiting room, the attacker is already most of the way there. Recent estimates suggest that a sufficiently fast quantum computer could finish the rest of the math in around 9 minutes. 9 out of 10. That gives them a real measurable window. Researchers have put it at around 40%. To derive your private key, forge their own version of your transaction with a higher fee, so it gets confirmed first, and steal your money out from under you while you're still literally waiting for the original transfer to clear. You'd watch your transaction fail. You'd see the funds end up somewhere else, and you would have no idea what just happened. Now, I know what you're thinking, because I thought it too. We've been hearing about quantum computers for decades. They're like nuclear fusion. Always 10 years away, always just over the horizon, always promised but never quite delivered. Should you, listening to this right now, actually be losing sleep? And the honest answer is no, not today. There is no quantum computer on Earth that can do what I just described. The hardware doesn't exist yet at the scale required. So the threat is not tomorrow morning your wallet gets drained. Please don't sell your Bitcoin because of this episode. But the reason this conversation is happening now urgently is because the estimates of what scale you actually need have been collapsing. And I mean really collapsing over the last 20 years. 2 decades ago, researchers thought you'd need something like 1 billion quantum bits to pull off this kind of attack. 1 billion. That was so far beyond what any lab could imagine building that nobody worried about it. Then the estimate dropped to 100 million, then 10 million. Today, the leading estimates put the requirement somewhere around 10 to 20,000. We went from 1 billion to 20,000 in 20 years. That's not progress in a straight line. That's a line bending sharply in the wrong direction if you're someone holding crypto. And the trend is still accelerating. A recent paper from Caltech and that startup I mentioned, Quera, looked at a totally different kind of quantum architecture. One built from individual atoms held in place by lasers instead of the more familiar superconducting circuits you usually hear about. Their numbers suggest a machine with about 26,000 of these neutral atom bits could break the cryptography Bitcoin relies on in roughly 10 days. Another startup called Iceberg Quantum has published designs suggesting an attack on a related cryptographic system with under 100,000 bits. And here's the part that should really catch your ear. The specific kind of math Bitcoin uses, the math that makes it so elegant and lightweight for classical computers, is actually about 100 times easier for a quantum computer to crack than the older, more cumbersome math that protects things like online banking and government systems. Bitcoin's mathematical elegance is, in this one way, also its weakness. Google's own quantum AI team has published estimates suggesting that with a sufficiently advanced quantum computer, you'd only need about 1,200 high-quality logical bits to break it. And here's the unsettling kicker. They released a kind of proof showing they know exactly how to design the attack, but they deliberately did not publish the actual blueprints because the blueprints were considered too sensitive to release publicly. Read that sentence again. Google has demonstrated that they know how to break Bitcoin's cryptography, and they have deliberately not shown the recipe. That's where we are. So if all of this is true, if the math is shrinking the timeline this dramatically, the next question becomes, who's actually paying attention? Because for a long time, this was a conversation happening among cryptographers and cypherpunks, the people in mailing lists and forums who care about this stuff for its own sake. That has changed. Markets price in risk long before disasters actually happen. And right now, the smart money is starting to price this in. The clearest example is BlackRock. BlackRock manages the iShares Bitcoin Trust, the largest Bitcoin ETF in the world. They recently amended their prospectus, the official legal document they file with regulators, to include explicit language warning investors that if quantum computing advances, the cryptography underlying Bitcoin could become ineffective and result in massive losses. That sentence is sitting in a regulatory filing right now. Major institutions, including Goldman Sachs, hold over $1 billion in this single ETF. We are no longer in cypherpunk territory. We're in fiduciary duty territory. If BlackRock and their custodians don't prepare for this and an attack happens, that's not just an unfortunate technical event. That's a violation of their legal obligation to their shareholders. And that pressure, I think, is what's going to actually force this upgrade to happen. The crypto network may end up upgrading not because the developers wanted to, but because the institutions managing trillions of dollars demand it long before any quantum computer actually exists. How each major blockchain handles this threat reveals a lot about its underlying philosophy. Bitcoin, true to form, is being deeply conservative. The current proposals, there's one called vidIQ 361 making the rounds, outline a slow, phased rollout. The idea is to gradually retire the old vulnerable signature types and basically tell users, hey, this is on you. Move your funds to a quantum-safe wallet or risk losing them. It's a private incentive structure rather than a forced transition. There are also discussions about emergency mechanisms, sometimes called lifeboat proposals, that would let people rescue funds in a crisis. But the general Bitcoin culture is move carefully, don't break anything, give people time, let the network evolve at its own pace. Ethereum is the opposite. They've got a dedicated post-quantum security team aiming for full quantum resistance by around 2029. That is right around the corner. They're heavily focused on letting individual users upgrade their own wallets to quantum-safe signatures without waiting for the entire network to coordinate. Vitalik Buterin, Ethereum's co-founder, has even sketched out an emergency plan. If a sudden quantum breakthrough happens, the Ethereum network could effectively pause, use a different kind of mathematical proof to verify legitimate ownership of funds, and rescue the network from a panic. It's proactive in a way that Bitcoin culturally just isn't. Then there's Solana, which is interesting because Solana's whole value proposition is speed. Everything runs fast, validators are tightly coordinated, the chain rolls forward at breakneck pace. That works great in normal times. But when you need to make a major cryptographic upgrade, that tight coordination becomes a liability rather than an asset. Solana's structure is more rigid than Ethereum's, and a quantum-safe transition would require basically every validator and every piece of software on the network to move in lockstep on the same upgrade window. That's a much harder coordination problem, and it's not yet clear how cleanly it could be done. But here's something that the experts keep emphasizing, and I think it's the part that hasn't really sunk in for most people. The base layer, Bitcoin's blockchain, Ethereum's blockchain, might not even be the most appealing target for a quantum attacker. The bigger, juicier prize is everything built on top of it. Decentralized finance, the world of smart contracts, the entire ecosystem of stablecoins and tokenized assets. There's something like $200 billion of value sitting in tokens that are controlled by smart contracts. Tether, USDC, tokenized treasury bills, all of it. And here's the vulnerability nobody's really talking about. These smart contracts are typically controlled by an administrator wallet, often a multi-signature wallet shared between several trusted parties. For operational convenience, these admin wallets reuse the same addresses constantly, which means, going right back to what we talked about earlier, Their public keys are permanently exposed on the blockchain, just sitting there in plain view. A quantum attacker doesn't need to break Ethereum, they don't need to take down Bitcoin, they just need to crack the admin keys for one big bridge contract or one major stablecoin issuer, and they can drain entire pools of assets with a single transaction. The base layer would still be technically secure, the network would still be running, and meanwhile someone could be quietly walking out the front door with billions of dollars. So if we know this is coming, if we know exactly where the vulnerabilities are, if we can see the timelines compressing year after year, the obvious question is, why don't we just upgrade right now? Why doesn't every blockchain switch to quantum-resistant math today and be done with it? The technology exists. There are quantum-safe signature schemes that have already been standardized and are ready to be deployed. The answer is that the trade-offs are brutal. The best analogy I've come across is this. Imagine you've been using a standard house key your whole life. Lightweight, fits comfortably in your pocket, opens every door in your house in about 2 seconds. Now imagine someone tells you that, for security reasons, every door in your house needs to be replaced with a massive bank vault door, and every key needs to be a heavy industrial thing the size of your forearm. Yes, it's more secure. Nothing's getting through one of those doors. But suddenly, moving around your own house becomes slow and exhausting and ridiculously expensive. That is what quantum-resistant signatures look like today. Depending on the scheme, they're anywhere from 40 to 170 times larger than the signatures Bitcoin and Ethereum use right now. A blockchain full of those signatures would be slow, expensive, bloated, almost beyond recognition. Transaction fees would skyrocket. Storage requirements would balloon. The chains might just stop being practical to use. But honestly, even the technical problem isn't the hardest part. The hardest part is social. There are roughly 2.5 million Bitcoin sitting in old, vulnerable addresses, including famously Satoshi Nakamoto's untouched coins from the very beginning of the network. To migrate those coins to quantum-safe addresses, somebody has to actively sign a transaction with the private key. But if the private key is lost, or if the owner is dead, or if Satoshi just never comes back, those coins are stuck. They can never be moved, which means the community faces a genuinely awful choice when the quantum threat starts to look imminent. Option 1, do nothing. Let the attackers eventually crack those old wallets and steal the coins. That would mean potentially handing a hostile nation-state, or whoever wins the quantum race first, something like 10% of the entire Bitcoin supply in one quiet sweep. That would crater the market and destabilize the entire ecosystem. Option 2, hard fork the network and burn those vulnerable coins before they can be stolen. But that violates the most sacred principle Bitcoin claims to stand for, which is immutability. The whole point of Bitcoin is that nobody, no government, no bank, no committee can take your coins. If the network can vote to burn your funds because you didn't upgrade in time, then it's not really immutable, is it? You've broken the core promise. You've shown that the rules can be changed when enough people decide they should be. And that's not a clean technical decision. That's a question about what Bitcoin is actually supposed to be in the first place. Burn or steal, that's the choice. There is no third option that doesn't involve picking which principle to break. So where does all of this leave us? Quantum computing probably doesn't kill Bitcoin tomorrow. The hardware isn't there yet. The timeline is real, but it's measured in years, not weeks. What it does is challenge one of the deepest assumptions baked into the entire crypto ecosystem, the assumption that time is on the network side. In the world Bitcoin was designed for, time strengthens the chain. Every block makes the history harder to rewrite. Every year that passes is more security piling on top of more security. In the quantum era, that's not obviously true anymore. Time may now belong to whoever prepares first. And I want to leave you with one last thought, because I think it's the most unsettling part of all of this. We've been talking about a quantum attack as if it would be obvious, a big dramatic heist. Billions of dollars vanishing overnight, headlines everywhere, panicked tweets, hearings on Capitol Hill. But what if it isn't like that at all? What if a nation-state quietly builds a sufficiently powerful quantum computer and just doesn't announce it? What if they don't go for the dramatic headlines? What if instead they use it discreetly, hoarding private keys, slowly siphoning funds from carefully chosen wallets, bypassing financial sanctions, turning the world's most transparent ledger into their own private channel for moving money? You wouldn't see a hack, you would just see strange withdrawals here and there that nobody could quite explain. And the math underneath the entire system would already be broken, and almost nobody would know it for years. That's a strange and quietly terrifying thought to sit with. Thanks for going down this rabbit hole with me. Keep questioning the assumptions behind the systems we trust. I'll see you on the next one.